guys, this is Naya. I'm here with two other couples, I guess I should say. I'm also in a couple, and I'm the founder of Bino. It's a faith-based community for young adult believers. So we are now going to discuss our next topic, which is godly relationships. So you guys all voted, and this is what we decided that we wanted to go into next. So this is really exciting. It's going to be a very complex topic, but I think there's going to be a lot of value that comes out of it. So we're just going to go around, introduce ourselves.
My name is Matthew. I'm dating this beautiful woman over here, Benita. We've been dating for around 6 months.
Yeah.
Anniversary on the 11th. And we met at it's called a UpTech Accelerator. It's like a collaboration startup workspace.
I'm Serge. I'm dating the founder of Bino, so I'm very lucky. We've been together for 5 months now, anniversary on the 1st of every month, easy to remember. And how we met, we actually met at the church we both attend.
Aisha was a part of it.
My name's Laurent. I'm dating this young lady here. And we've been dating for almost 3 years now. So we met officially at a friend's kickback.
But they're not just dating.
Oh, right. Sorry. We're engaged.
Yes.
It's new. Sorry. Old habits.
All right. So there's a couple of disclaimers that I wanted to put up first and foremost. I just want to say we are not claiming to be the holiest of holies. We don't have perfect godly relationships. So if that's the kind of video that you are expecting, that's not what you're going to see. We're all very flawed. And also I want to note that this is kind of scary for most of us to come on camera and be really vulnerable about the personal things that are going on in our relationships. But we're willing to push past it and hopefully start a really great dialogue around this topic. We put on Bino's Instagram story 10 questions, yes or no questions, super easy polls. And then we also did a Google survey with more open-ended questions. And these just go over kind of the pulse of where we're all at with these topics around purity and boundaries and keeping Christ at the center. So we're just gonna go over those really quick. All of us are gonna read some of the results, just so we can get an idea of where we're all at in this conversation. So there were 10 questions total, about 65 respondents. So let's go ahead and get started. So Matthew, what was the first question?
Yeah, so the first one was, do you have a clear understand of what a godly relationship is? And most people said yes. The average is around 71%.
That's pretty good.
So question I have is, do you know a couple that models your ideal relationship? Don't have to know them personally. And 94.5% of respondents said yes.
The next question was, have you prayed about your ideal man or woman? And the average, 96%, said yes.
Have you ever been in a serious relationship? The average 73% said yes.
Have you ever been in a Christ-centered relationship? They said no, 55.5%.
And I thought that was
no.
interesting because most people haven't been in a godly relationship. I thought that was like a really, even though most people have been in a serious relationship, most haven't been in a godly one.
Yeah. So my question is, are you currently in a Christ-centered relationship? And the average 60% said no.
And I have another one. It says, have you ever been in an unequally yoked relationship? So that basically means the person that you're dating doesn't share the same faith. And the average 64% said yes, that they have.
My question is, have you ever put boundaries in place in your relationship? Average was 74% said yes.
And my question said, do you currently choose to abstain from sex? And 87% said yes.
And then lastly, if yes, so if you do choose to abstain from sex, does that also include abstaining from oral or anal sex? And 90.5% said yes. So that's where we're at. And now let's start with the first question. So how do you define a godly relationship? And before we each kind of talk about that, I did want to read what the people from the survey said. So when I asked this question, they said it lines up with the word. These are people that are currently in a godly relationship, and I asked, like, what do you believe makes it so? And they said it currently lines up with the word. We're both trying to seek God's will for ourselves individually and as a couple. We're constantly asking God to be in the middle of our relationship. We pray together. We seek God first for all relationship issues. And then God being in both of our lives, attending church, praying together, and connecting to God. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything that like they didn't say that you guys feel like defines a godly relationship?
You want to say something?
You can go.
I think for me, like one of the notes I wrote down is just like the idea of courting. So like dating with the intent of marriage, not saying that like you can't date unless you know that you're going to, but not just like passively dating around.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I was gonna say just like a certain level of accountability. Like I feel like in a godly relationship, typically you're gonna hold your partner to different standards than you would, other people who you're in a relationship in your life that may not share the same values as you or consider Christ to be the center of their lives, and that may look drastically different in some ways, depending on where you guys stand. So.
Yeah, I think it's one thing to both have, God in your lives individually, but I think when you come together to what makes it a godly relationship as a couple is like being intentional about how you actively are keeping Christ at the center.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I feel like that's a huge part of the definition is like, where does he show up in your daily interaction with one another?
Mm-hmm.
And I also want to mention that when you say godly relationship, most people tend to think that 24/7 God all around, church, praying all the time. That's not what it's about. You just have to understand that he's at the center and he's the one that brought you together. He's the glue that's keeping you together. And without him, you have to recognize and at least acknowledge that without God, you guys wouldn't even have met, or you wouldn't be in a relationship with the person that you're currently in a relationship with. So you have to continue praising him and honoring him in order to stay with the person you desire to be with. So that's what defines a godly relationship, at least in my eyes.
Yeah. And then like something that we talked about too is just making sure we're not making each other idols as well. And so just, in our relationship, we're trying to help the other person grow closer to God. So whether that's praying for each other, sending each other Bible verses, encouragement, even our own personal walks aren't, perfect. And so as you would a friend help them in their walk, like we help each other in our walks, like our own personal walk with Christ too.
Right. That just about sums up what I was going to say.
Yeah.
I think we covered most of it. Just making sure, first of all, that you both are Christian, and also talking about like what that means to each other. Like, what does your God look like? What does your faith look like?
I think we can go more deeper into that later about specifics, like how we're specifically incorporating God. But I did want to, just because we're kind of talking about it, the unequally yoked conversation. I know that somebody, people are bringing that up in the comments here. But there's a good Bible verse about that. I'm not sure which of you wrote it down about the being unequal. I think it was you.
Yeah.
Aisha.
So the verse I wrote down was Amos 3:3, and it says, "Can two walk together except they be agreed?" So I don't know, I feel like that's kind of self-explanatory. It's just basically saying that, I kind of wrote down too the idea of like the actual like yoke for a cattle. I think you explained this to me. I don't know if you want to explain it.
Yeah, so like I remember when I first heard that scripture about being unequally yoked, I just assumed it was some biblical word that was derived from something with the egg. I don't really know. But so a yoke is actually what farmers, from the Bible times till now used to or put on cattle's necks to have, I think like two of them to move them in the same direction. So, but if one of the yokes that they put around the neck was like unbalanced or off, the cows would go in different directions. So that's why I said you can't be unequally yoked, because if one yoke is up here and one yoke is down here, you guys are gonna go in completely different directions, and you guys are never gonna be on the same path. How can you end up together and not walking on the same path? So, yeah.
And I think the majority of the poll results reflected that most people have been in an unequally yoked relationship. And I know I have, and I think maybe you might as well talk about it now, but for those of you who have, what do you feel like is the difference between that and your godly relationship that you're in now? And I could start if you guys wanted to think about that, but yeah. I don't know, it was really difficult for me because I wasn't mature in my faith in that previous relationship, so I really didn't even know that I wanted somebody who was also godly.
Mm-hmm.
And so when that situation came together, it was like, he has pretty much everything I wanted except for this huge part that like, it's kind of a non-negotiable. And so we kind of struggled with how, can he come over to this side, if you will, and it just was never really genuine. So even though like he made attempts for me, it wasn't for God.
Mm-hmm.
And so now in this relationship, it's great because we're on the same page. Like we're doing this for the same reason. So when we talk about purity and boundaries and things like that, we're doing it for the same reason. We're doing it because we want to honor God. And like I said, in the previous relationship, he wasn't doing it to honor God. He was doing it because he wanted to please me. And so that was bound to fail, obviously.
Right. I can speak to the same thing. My first real relationship was with a woman who wasn't Christian, and I tried to bring her to church and stuff like that, but I can just tell on her face she was like, "Why are they making me sing?" and gave me back the pamphlet, and it was just it just kind of hurt, and I was like, "This just isn't gonna work out," and I could tell just my soul was just aching from the relationship in general.
Yeah, this was a big learning point, I think, for me. I was in a pretty serious relationship for a long time that, kind of similar to you, I don't think at the time I would have considered it so unequally yoked because I too was not mature in my faith, but I knew what I wanted. And I also would look at that person and say, well, as long as they're open to the idea of believing in God, I have a chance. And I know Pastor kind of talks about the idea of missionary dating and the dangers that kind of lie in there. But I think the biggest thing for me that I see a difference in now is I've seen a diagram put it before, if a man is here and a woman is here, the closer we get to God, the closer we get together. And so in that relationship, we didn't really know what we were trying to get to. Every relationship you're gonna have your disagreements, but now for us, things that we might have a hard time with, we can turn to the Bible and say, okay, well, what does God say? So it's kind of you have a final word, and we know that we're headed in the same direction, and we value the same things.
The thing I'll say about this is whenever you try to be in a relationship that's unequally yoked, there's always compromises involved. You compromise on the very things that are part of your foundation. So for me personally, whenever I would date people, or whenever I dated somebody that wasn't Christian, I would always continue doing what I do at church, what I do in terms of my faith walk, and I would hope that they would follow me, that they would see what I do and see how well my life is, and they would just want to hop on that train, if you will, and just try to understand where I'm coming from. But it would never work out. They would try, but it wasn't intentional, and it was always fake, and I would have to compromise on my end and to try to meet them where they're at, and they would try to compromise on their end to meet me where I was at, and there was just that unbalance, if you will, and we were headed in two completely different directions, and it was doomed to fail from the start.
Yeah, let's go more into boundaries and kind of when we had the conversations in our relationships. Did you guys, was it early on? Was it more gradual? And what were those boundaries that you set in place, if you feel comfortable sharing?
So before I started dating Asia, we're now engaged. But before I started dating Asia, it was probably a year before we met. And I guess my faith journey has been, a little bit different from what I typically hear from people that I speak to, in the sense that I was brought up in the church, spoon-fed the word basically from birth. And so I spent all my young childhood, school education life being the quote-unquote outsider of the not conforming to those around me, and just being that kid, who everyone said was religious, or he's different, and so forth and so on. And I got into a place when I got to college where I was like, you know what? Went through some things. I was like, maybe I should just like chill out for a little bit on some things and just like switch things up. And so that kind of led to me kind of literally setting down my walk for a couple years. Not as far as like who I was overall, but certain things that were a big part of it. And because I wasn't living overall how Christ called me to live, it made me I kind of had like a Jonah moment where I literally was like running from him because I wasn't ready to let these other things go. Even though everything about what had been instilled in me was like, this is where you're supposed to be, bro. Like almost like a magnet. Like, I'm trying to go over here. And so eventually, I bring up the Jonah reference because the further he ran away from God, the more like stuff started going wrong. And that's literally what happened in my life. Like things just started falling down. And then I had to look at what the reason of that was. And so, I got to a place where about a year before I met Aisha, I was like, you know what, Lord, I'm gonna get back on track, but I need someone to help keep me accountable. So send me the one who can help keep me accountable. And I met Aisha a year later. We started talking, and I remember I think our second and third time hanging out, and there was no reason for us. I think we're just like watching TV or something. There was no reason for this to even come up. We had just started hanging out. We had eaten sushi a couple times, and she was just like, oh, by the way, we're not gonna be having sex. And I was just like, oh, so this is it? I was like, so this is her, because I had never been in a position. I had come from a position where I told numerous girls, hey, by the way, I'm celibate, I'm saving myself. And then once I decided to put that down, that was for years, all the way through high school up to college. And then once I set that aside, I had never been in a position where a girl had actually held me accountable. And it's a lot harder after you let it go. Once you don't let it go, it's a little bit easy. Once you let it go, it's like, oh, bro. So I hadn't been in this position in like 4 or 5 years. And I'm just like, what did you say? Like, I'm like, okay, like, yo, all right, let's do it. And that's how I knew.
For me, like when we talk about boundaries, I just kind of think like, hey, what are some things that I only want to share with my husband that I think is only special, like for my husband to have, instead of like just because before in past relationship we just came up with rules. Again, we were legalistic. I was just trying to be perfect, and it all like fell apart.
I had decided, there is no crossing the line. There is no allowing myself to feel weak and then relying on the other person who's also weak and pretending to say no, if you will. I just decided, and I'm going to say no. I don't want to do this anymore because it's not right. It's not pleasing God. It's not honoring God. So when I met Naya and we started dating, or interest meeting, I think that's what you called it, our date. Interesting. But when we started going on dates and we started getting to know each other better, things were just fine. About a week or so after we started dating, the conversation about sex was brought up, and I straight up told her, I'm like, that's off the table. I'm not doing that. And she got back to me and said, that's a surprise, but because I wasn't doing that either. So we had that mutual agreement that that's a line that's never going to get crossed. It doesn't matter how weak we get.
I think one thing to add is that there's one thing about like having the ultimate line, and we've all agreed like we're remaining abstinent, but there's a lot of things in between there. So that's where it gets tricky, is because like we haven't been perfect about the in-between stuff, because there's so much room for like, okay, as long as we don't do that. And I've lately been feeling really convicted about the in-between and all the things that you can get away with, the loopholes. And for me, I realized that I don't want to, like, if I'm going to sacrifice my sexuality, if I'm going to offer that up to God, I might as well do it fully. And it's still, like, this is very new. Like, I literally came up with this revelation, like, 2 days ago. So what I've been trying to do is, like, or what I've realized is I can't expect God to bless our relationship fully if there's these little compromises that we're doing. Like, if you're sacrificing, if you're not fully sacrificing those things, then you're also sacrificing the full potential that God can do in your relationship. And I feel like I really want God's best, and I don't know, it's like, without trying to say too much, I'm trying to figure out, like, should I go into the details? I don't know. But I'll just leave it at, that's something that we've recently been trying to look at a little bit further. And I think also the beginning, like when we talk about the very, very beginning of us dating, we had a lot of those restrictions in place. And then as we started, you know, going further in our relationship, those things became looser and you become more comfortable with that person. And that's when it's like, okay, we've drifted really far away. Like, wait a minute, how far did we get away from, you know, that? And there's a reason why we had those kind of stronger boundaries in place. So why change that just with a few months passing by? I mean, we've only been together for 5 months, so. And I think, yeah, there's lots of different boundaries too, not just physical, sexual boundaries. And we can maybe, if anyone else has others that don't relate to that, you can talk about that. I know.
We have one. I think it's a cultural thing, I guess. But one of our boundaries is I can meet her parents, she can meet my parents or my family, but our families can't meet each other. Like our parents can meet each other yet until we either get engaged or we're ready to get engaged, if you will. And primarily that's because, you know, if you're not serious or intentional about the relationship, then why should your parents meet?
But talk about your culture.
Yeah,
because that's not typical for like American culture. It's not American.
So I'm Congolese. I'm from the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Speaking of boundaries that like go outside of like purity and things like that, one for us that I feel like has a lot to do with, or I guess reflects it being a godly relationship, is how we speak to each other, how we conduct ourselves with each other. Like we have certain, I have friends that joke like, do y'all fight ever? Like, you know, oh, we have squabbles, you know what I'm saying? But like, we squabble, but like, we do have arguments, and and they can get pretty heated and things like that. But we have rules that aren't even like, things. Oh, let's try and do this. It's just kind of understood, and it's not like things that they just disintegrate over time. It's like, no, these are things that. Like for most of the gentlemen here in the room, I'm sure it's kind of understood. Hey, if I get upset, I'm not gonna hit her upside the head. Like that's something that like no matter how angry you get, you're never gonna give yourself that leeway unless you're a certain type of man. Yeah. So you're never gonna this day when circumstances like no, that's just never gonna happen. So we feel that should be the same. You're never gonna hear me call you out of your name. Especially using any type of expletive and vice versa. And one thing we see with like more secular relationships is that's just like accepted, just kind of eliminated, all those things, talking about each other negatively to other people. And those are things that God instills in us as Christians that just happen to spill over into our relationship.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to bring up, because one question we got from the survey was, what are some ways you can decrease pressures of marriage early on in a Christ-centered relationship? I think this is a topic that I don't often hear, but I know we've struggled with this, trying not to talk about marriage too much, even though that's the goal, because we're not in that stage right now. So it can get tricky, and that comes with like talking about kids' names and like, I don't even know, like what are there's tons of little things that come with that, but we watched this one video that kind of explained why you shouldn't do that, and that worked for like 2 weeks. So we weren't doing that for like 2 weeks, and then I feel like you really struggle with this. I'm always having to be like, okay, wait.
You see, she's blaming me for everything.
I know, it comes up often.
She didn't say no.
No, but she's. I mean, it's in my eyes, it's fun to think about. Primarily because I'm not just dating just to date the person, like you mentioned. You're not just doing it because you want to. And yes, I agree. It can get very hard not to think about it, or not to have ideas of what it could look like with the person you're currently dating or in a godly relationship with. But it's something that you must avoid. I'm not doing a good job at it. I'll admit it. But
individually, it's okay, obviously.
Yeah.
But I think to continually like bring it up together, that's when it can get tricky. And also, besides just like talking about it, I think acting like you're already in a marriage. Even if you're not having sex, there's other things that you can be doing that are, like you said, like you guys set boundaries that you want to save for your marriage in the marriage context. So like there's certain things that I feel like we got really comfortable with one another pretty quickly. I mean, we dated literally for 2 weeks before like making it official, and we're boyfriend and girlfriend. So that was not a very long time. It was because like we felt really comfortable with one another. We felt like this was very God driven, and it just, things happen so quickly. It gets hard to not, keep moving forward at that same pace. But I want to enjoy all that dating, like this part of our lives have to offer, because once we get to marriage, and then we're gonna be like, oh, I wish we could go back, or never enjoying the moment.
I guess I've always had a very different perspective. I guess I somewhat consider myself like a biblical Christian, and so like so I always reference like, well, in the Bible they were da 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 da, and like so one thing I will say about living in today 2019, or even just going back to like recent times within the past few decades, the process of courting and dating and so forth is somewhat it doesn't complement the Christian lifestyle. And it's also, in a sense, somewhat unnatural as Christians. There's a Bible verse, which I don't have because I didn't prep at all, where in the Bible, Paul speaking to the Corinthians, and he's somewhat bragging on himself, but Paul was that dude. And he was like, if you're not like me, basically, where you're so aligned with God, you have everything in control, take a wife, take women, marry your husbands quickly to flee from sexual sin. And again, I'm paraphrasing that, but basically he was saying like, if you're not me, and you don't have straight perfection with controlling your desires, that's healthy, that's natural. Get married ASAP. And now I don't want that to be taken as, hey, you find somebody you just like or attracted to, hurry up and get married instantly. But I also feel that the whole, I've never heard about boyfriends and girlfriends in the Bible. Like, when Sarah and Ahem were boyfriend and girlfriend, I've never seen that. It's always like they met and they were married, boom, or so-and-so's wife. So, living in a culture where, especially as young people, like people were getting married younger than us, and it was expected that you got married. Like, you're 19, why are you not married yet? And you're a woman, why are you not nowadays? It's like, you're 19? Okay, when you're 30, we can talk about it.
Right.
Because, our society is different, money, economics, like all that stuff is in place. But personally, I feel like we're built to, hey, meet that one, God aligns your hearts, figure everything out, and then realistically in the Bible, they got married, they sealed the deal, and then that was that. Now we kind of have, 2-year engagement, and now we have to figure out all these, man-made engineered methods of, trying to basically resist what God put in place, which technically isn't supposed to be fought for that amount of time. So, but it's our reality, right? So I personally don't see that there's anything wrong with talking about marriage and while dating.
Wonder though, with just keeping in mind the person who asked that question, what if they're kind of just dating and they're dating Christians, but they don't know if they have the potential for like as husband material or wife material? So that's when I feel like, I don't know if that's where the person's heart was, but I definitely have talked to friends who are like, I don't even know, like I want to get married, but I don't know if this is the one.
Oh yeah, that's a different.
Yeah, so that's what
that's a different. Yeah, I think that's a different.
I think once you know, are you saying like once you know that it's the one, then you can freely talk about it, kind of thing?
Yeah, I feel like once God's written it on your heart, and because God has a very distinct fingerprint. Like I got guys ask me all the time, like, how'd you know to propose? How'd you know it was her? Like God he had a fingerprint, very consistent. So I knew the engagement has been being planned for we've been together almost 3 years. For like 2 years, it's been getting planned. And it's we're not even at a full 3 years. So when God puts his fingerprint on it, it's recognizable because he's consistent. And once God's written that on your heart, there's really no point in playing games outside of the world that we live in, and we're at school, we're finances, this and that, what's expected by our families and society. And that's something that we have to deal with, and we have a higher responsibility as Christians living in modern times to conduct ourselves accordingly. We're about the same time you're growing, you can do what you want, go elope, whatever. But if you don't want all that, that drama, this is what it looks like for us. I was just saying that based off what's happening in the Bible, once that's been written on your heart, now this is what's expected?
It's something that I've seen, it's something that I've noticed, and it's something that I can see in you. So I'll continue having fun preparing without your knowledge.
Without your knowledge.
God and I are going to make an awesome plan.
It's kind of going back to the physical, because I know there's more that I guess we could untap with that. I'm trying to look at my notes here and see if there's anything that we didn't already say.
I can say something about
Go ahead.
in Michael Todd's relationship series goal, again, I recommend that people watch that. He mentioned something that I think was really keen to my decision to just abstain from it completely. He said that sex is a very powerful thing, and it is something that should be kept within the right container. And he used the example of a flood. You know, when water is in the right container, when you have like what are those called? Water plants or hydro plants or something?
Like a dam?
Like a dam, yeah. So where water is contained, it's beautiful, like a waterfall, it's beautiful, it flows naturally and everything works fine. When it's not in the right container, it has the power to destroy. So you've seen typhoons, you've seen tornado storms, you can see the devastation. And as far as sex was concerned, he mentioned that, you know, it's more than just an act. When you have sex with someone, you join with the person, and the word join is key. You join with them physically through the act of sex, you join with them emotionally through intimacy, and you join with them spiritually through covenant. So in a way, you're making God say I do while you're doing it. How many times did you make God say I do? You know, that's one of the questions. He said you can spend 5 years without seeing the person, and then the moment you see them after 5 years, you're still a bit shaken up. Why? Because you were joined to that person. Keeping that in mind and fleeing from sexual immorality altogether. Like the verse that you have, it's 1 Corinthians 6:18 through 20. It says flee. My best friend and I have this joke where we say, that's what you have? Yeah. So my best friend and I make this joke where we say, you know, it didn't say walk, it didn't say jog, it said flee, aka run like there's a fire coming behind you. So it's really important to keep that in mind.
Another fire-related Bible verse, Proverbs 6:27. Can a man scoop fire into his lap without his clothes being burned? That was really powerful. Yeah. One thing I wanted to mention, let me know if you guys have any opinions on this, but like what if somebody, and I'm one of these people, have already crossed lines that shouldn't be crossed in previous relationships? You know, I feel like we're talking a lot about abstinence and purity and things like that, but it's, if you've made a mistake in the past, like ask for forgiveness if you haven't already, and know that you can move forward. Like, you don't have to be a perfectly holy person. There's a lot of Christians, like I said, I'm one of them, who aren't virgins and who are in a different relationship, and they're trying to seek a new godly relationship.
Yeah, I actually had a verse. The very first one I came across that I wrote down was Luke 5:32, and it says, "I came out to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance." And I think it's just like a good reminder. Obviously, it's not necessarily talking about sexual immorality, but I think like it's a good peek into like, this is how we consider everything else that we do. Like, we know that we are born sinners, and we know that God forgives us for everything else. Why is it that if we, make slip-ups around like our sexual purity, we tend to beat ourselves up so much about it? And I don't know, this could just be me putting it on people, but I feel like a lot of times women especially, like, we kind of are really hard on ourselves about that. And this isn't to say, like, go do whatever, and, you know, God's, like, don't abuse the grace that you have, but know that there always is grace. I think, like, there's always going to be consequences, but just like anything else we do, when we repent for it, when we pray about it, God is always going to forgive you, and He can always make good with what you are giving to Him. So the moment that we give that to Him, I believe that, we're delivered from it, and we're kind of set free from that.
I mean, we've kind of already covered this, but just making sure that forgiveness is involved, and a lot of mercy in relationships, and like people mess up. We shouldn't expect our partners to be perfect in a world, that we live in right now. So yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, even within this context of a godly relationship, mistakes are being made. Like it's part of the learning process.
Yeah, it's definitely like freeing too in that sense, because like I would say like, okay, like I'm not a virgin, but I'm a born again virgin. You know, because like Jesus, like he really does redeem all things. You know, and like you're saying, actually, this could be something, and it was something that I like beat myself up about. But then being single, coming to terms with it, like forgiving myself, and like God coming to terms with God forgiving me, but then not being in a relationship with someone who is also like, no, I still think that you're beautiful, like, you know what I mean, and saying like, and I've forgiven you for that. It's like, now I can still really be free and like not continuing like wallowing in shame or anything like that.
Another person's comment was, I've learned a lot about Christ-centered relationships in the past 2 years. I've also learned that God loves us no matter what, but he blesses those who are obedient. And that was really poignant. All right, can we talk about what we do to actively keep Christ at the center? Any like, activities, or like what do you do that's really intentional? Because like I said, I feel like we can't just stop at, well, we both believe in God.
I mean, we just have weekly, except I think we haven't done these past 2 weeks. No, we did.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, we did. Like get-togethers where we talk about like our week and like our faith. On Sundays, just at like maybe a coffee shop or in a hot tub.
Yeah.
And we just kind of talk about our week and anything we want to pray about with each other, and then we pray at the end.
Yeah, because like I would say our relationship is a little bit different too. Like when we were to go back talking about the whole marriage thing, like we don't talk about marriage just because we're both like entrepreneurs. We both have goals that we want to make personally. So we both know like, okay, we wouldn't date anyone we wouldn't marry. So that's good enough for us. You know what I mean? And so then that's just kind of how we go along. But because we're so like focusing on our own personal lives, while also just like building a relationship, we don't see each other that much throughout the week, you know. And so, but we also still want to push each other toward Christ, because that's like something that we hold really valuable. So our weekly get-togethers, or like times that we set aside, it's like, okay, we're hanging out, we're on a date, you know. But then also too, it's like, what did God teach you this week?
So when we first started dating, I think it was literally 2 weeks after we started to do the Bible study around sex. So we've been doing Bible studies based on topics. So right now he's long distance, he's in Louisville on internship, so we don't really get to see each other in person, but throughout the week we'll have different phone calls, and they're related to like certain things, dedicated to certain things. So Tuesdays are like our prayer. Thursday, that's when we do the Bible study, and we like review the notes. And then Sundays we both go to the same church, so we review the sermon notes. So I think that's been pretty good, just to have like, I think consistency. You guys said once a week, so just like having something regular is really helpful, and it really helps to make things intentional.
I'd much rather you be led by God than by me. I'm flawed. I make mistakes all the time. So if you're following me, then you're also going to make as many mistakes as I do. Whereas if you follow God, you know that you're never going to make a mistake. So whatever you feel on your heart that God's calling you to do, whether that's fasting or telling me to go a certain place or do something, tell me and I'll listen to it, because it's coming straight from God, not from you, not from me, just from him. So I think that's also important. And another thing we do is we serve together as well.
I think for us it was actually a little bit different. I feel like for me anyways, it was kind of hard, because I'm very like similar, where I feel like, oh, we have to be on a schedule, and I would try. So we were long distance too for pretty much the entirety of our relationship. There was a small little few month gap where we were in the same city, but otherwise we were, completely different states, all the way up until, the engagement really is when he came back home. So it was, we really had to be intentional about the time that we spent. And for me, I was that way, where I was like, let's be on a schedule, like, let's pray together like 3 times a week on this day, this time, and talk about these things, and send this many scriptures a week and all this other stuff. But for him, that was like, it can be, I guess, like overwhelming, and that's not really how he operates. And so we kind of had to learn, how do we work together on that. While we're not really like on a schedule per se, we're both very open to, God put this on my heart can we talk about this, or can we address this?
I'm the planner in the relationship, but when it comes to this stuff, she's the one with the planner and the notes and this and that. Like even at church, I'm the one listening, and then we'll talk about it 2 weeks later, and then she's there taking notes. And go, what did he say? Did I write that down? You know, she's very, very organized like that when it comes to how she, tastes in God, how she, worships and things like that. So I think it is very fluid, and like I had to learn a lot through Asia about dating and intentional dating and godly dating. I used to think that God was supposed to send me a Barbie packaged girl and this and that because I was all good to go, right? But it's like, no, he sends you someone flawed because look at a rower, rowing to get somewhere. You build muscle, you get stronger when you're constantly working on it. And when we and her were working together to get to a better place, here God is working on all my imperfections and flaws and brokenness and things that I wasn't even paying attention to. And then you look up and you realize you've been cultivating this tree, and now she's giving you shade. And that's really what our dynamic was. And so fluid as far as like seeking God together. We don't really have an alarm or a schedule. When God speaks to us, we try and listen and kind of go off of that.
Yeah, I think it just goes to show that it really is a personal thing. Like you have to talk about it with your partner and figure out what works for you. There's no like template on godly relationships. So hopefully we've given you a couple different ideas of like if you're looking for what it looks like, but yeah, it ultimately depends on you and your partner and what you guys decide. I think I want to end on just one final question. Given the fact that we aren't perfect and that we are flawed, what do you feel is the biggest area of improvement for you in your relationship in terms of keeping it godly?
When I'm upset or like angry or she's irritated with me or something like that, I'm not really in the mood to pray. I don't really want to pray. Like she'll be like, should we pray? And I'm just like, no. Or she's like, even if she's like upset me in some way, or she's apologetic about it or whatever, or vice versa, and she's like, should we pray? I'm really not in the mood to pray. And then I really, have to really dig deep to you, especially if she wants me to pray. I'm just, oh God. I definitely say just like, I individually within the relationship want to improve on, separating my flesh from, my duties as a leader in the relationship and just as a man of God and as a Christian.
Something that we can definitely work on is, I guess, keeping each other accountable more often. I feel like you said, we get too comfortable, and it becomes what was once a rule or a unique thing becomes more of an expectation. And I feel like that's something that we can work on. Keeping each other accountable. If we feel like, okay, we don't need to do this, or we don't need to say that, or we need to open our Bibles and study together, we do it.
I want to get out more, like,
Here we go.
because we do a lot. We're both homebodies, so when we hang out, it's usually just like at your apartment or at my house, and we just like watch TV or whatever. Like, it does sound good.
I know, right?
I like doing that, but when it's the only thing you do, like, there's so many things that.
Winter was involved.
Okay, winter, yeah. We did start dating in winter, so now that it's actually this weekend, we actually got out of the house twice. Wow. Twice. That's how we grow as a couple and get to know one another better, not by like watching TV.
There's a lot I just want to work on in general. You could talk about me being stronger with boundaries and things, and being more, I guess, emotionally involved as far as words. I'm not much of a talker. And explaining like my feelings and things, and she is. So she's always asking me how I feel. I'm like, I don't know.
But if the person you're trying to work on those things, I guess, with isn't willing to do that, or isn't your friend enough to even consider that, then you can sense it and you can tell that it's not the right person. So whenever I do something wrong, she's always calling me on it, and she doesn't tell me what I want to hear. She tells me what I need to hear. If I'm doing something wrong, I don't need someone to say, "Oh, it's okay." She always tells me, "Yeah, you need to do." I mean, I get that you made a mistake. Everyone does that, but you need to be better at it. You need to change that path. As my dad always says, when when you're 10, 20 plus years into your lives together, love won't be enough. Like if you don't have the little things to keep you together, if you don't know the person at their core, then you won't, like, saying I love you every day, or saying, oh, I care about you or something, won't just be enough. So you have to know the person deeply. So I think that's something that we continue to work on every day. What are the little things about Naya that I don't know? There's always something new to learn about your partner.
Well, let's keep this conversation going. If there's something that we didn't get to talk about that you are interested in exploring more, you can comment below, or maybe you have a different opinion on something that we've said. So whatever the case, we hope to keep this going, and we're excited. And thank you guys for joining us and listening into our conversation. So definitely give us a like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye.